The kettle started to whistle just as I heard my daughter-in-law laugh. She's always hovering. Still, I didn't say a word, just turned my wedding ring inward, like I was folding part of myself away. As the lemon-scented steam curled through the guest house, it stopped smelling like home. While she poured tea into a mug I bought for my son, I remembered whose name was still on the deed. The same woman who married into my family now walks through my house like I'm the guest. That's when I opened the trust file and rewrote the ending, with my name, not hers. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The kettle hadn't even started to hum when Lori stepped out onto the back porch. The late afternoon air carried a faint dampness, Kentucky humidity settling after a soft rain, and her throat prickled with the edge of another cough. She pressed a hand to her chest, muffling the sound, but it slipped through anyway, thin and human. Through the open kitchen window of the main house, voices drifted, one light, one weary. Maddie's tone cut clear. "Jesus, she's always lurking." The words landed with the quiet thud of something small but sharp. Lori froze mid-step, just beyond the hydrangea bush. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, pale hair and a cardigan sleeve visible in the window's angle. Inside, Maddie stood at the counter, her back turned, folding a dish towel with precision, her mouth tight. Lori waited for the soft voice she hoped would follow. Ethan's. It didn't come. Just the shuffle of cabinets, the running of water, and Maddie's low sigh that somehow sounded like ownership. Lori's hand dropped to her side. She felt a small heat rise at the base of her neck, not from anger, at least not yet, but from something older, more tired, a mother's quiet inventory of how much she's been tolerated lately. She turned away before the kettle screamed. The steps creaked beneath her weight as she crossed the yard, the gravel crunching under her flats. The guest house sat where her husband's steady hands had built it 25 years ago. White trim, blue shutters, and a porch swing that still swayed slightly from the earlier wind. Inside, everything was still. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and old pine from the polished furniture. A clock ticked, firm, precise, marking each second that her son's silence still echoed in her ears. She set her mug down untouched and walked toward the small roll-top desk by the window. From the bottom drawer she pulled out a key, thin, brass, worn smooth at the teeth. It clicked open a smaller drawer within, one she hadn't touched since before Ethan's wedding. Inside, an old brown folder labeled in faded blue ink, Hale Property, Deed and Trust, 1998. She ran her thumb along the edge of the paper, the way one might trace the outline of a scar. Her late husband's signature curved across the top page, deliberate and looping, like he'd known she'd need it someday. The paper felt heavier than she remembered. She sat down at the desk, smoothing the folder open beneath the light. Rain began to patter against the window, slow and rhythmic. From somewhere distant she could faintly hear Josie's laughter. A child's clear, bright sound cutting through the dusk. That sound softened her jaw. Just a little. Lori turned a page, eyes moving over the legal phrases she'd once pretended not to understand. Easements, survivorship rights, ownership parcels. Each word now sat like a tool waiting to be picked up. There had been times she'd brushed off Maddie's sighs, her polished little digs about how nice it must be to have space to herself. But this wasn't just about a rolled eye or a muttered comment. It was the confirmation that she'd become invisible in the home she'd built. And invisibility, she'd learned long ago, was the last stage before erasure. The kettle in the main house whistled faintly through the rain. She pictured Maddie pouring tea, her tea, into a mug she'd once bought for Ethan's first apartment. Lori reached for a pen. The click echoed softly in the small room. She wrote a single note on the inside cover of the folder. Phyllis, call tomorrow, check title. Her handwriting was steady. She slid the folder back into the drawer, locked it, and rested her hand on the smooth wood surface for a long moment. Her reflection in the window looked smaller than she remembered, framed by darkness and the faint blur of rain. From the main house, a door shut. Voices again, muffled this time. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was enough. Light, casual, normal. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She stood, flicked off the desk lamp, and crossed to the window overlooking the yard. The guest house light reflected in small pools across the grass, each one catching the silver of the fence line that once felt more symbolic than real. Now, it felt like a boundary she might finally make literal. A long breath left her chest, slow and deliberate. The kind you take when something inside you has shifted just enough to change the air around it. In the quiet, the clock ticked once more. She reached for the curtain and let it fall closed. Outside, the rain stopped. The night pressed in close. And somewhere behind the glass of her own home, Lori Hale began to remember exactly what still belonged to her. The next morning arrived gray and windless, the kind of Kentucky quiet that felt padded, like the whole street was still asleep. Lori dressed slow, pressed slacks, a navy cardigan, her wedding ring turned so the diamond faced inward. She drove into town with her thermos of black coffee, the road slick from last night's rain. Grant Taylor's office sat above the insurance agency on Clay Avenue, second floor, faded gold letters stenciled on glass. Taylor and Associates, Real Property Law. The stairwell smelled faintly of coffee and copy toner. Grant was already at his desk, shirt sleeves rolled, reading glasses halfway down his nose. He looked up when she entered. "Morning, Ms. Hale." "Lori," she corrected softly. She always did. He gestured toward a leather chair. A small stack of files sat beside it. "I looked up your parcel like you asked. You were right to be curious." She set her thermos down, folded her hands, waiting. He flipped open the top folder, pages crisp and neatly tabbed. "Guest house, yours outright, built on subparcel B, legally distinct from the main dwelling. The title from '98 still lists you as 50% owner of the entire Hale property." He slid the paper toward her. The blue stamp of the county recorder glimmered faintly in the office light. Lori stared at the page. She'd forgotten how her name looked next to her husband's in print. Loretta M. Hale and Charles J. Hale, joint tenants. "Nearly half?" she asked quietly. Grant nodded. "Technically, yes. Ethan and Madison's mortgage only covers the portion of land where the main house sits. You still hold equity in the rest, including the drive and the rear acreage." She leaned back, letting the information settle like a stone finding its level in water. "So, if I wanted to, hypothetically, redraw those lines?" His lips twitched in a half smile. "You'd need updated surveys and some signatures, but it's doable." Lori exhaled through her nose, calm, deliberate. The hum she'd carried in her chest since last night quieted. When she returned home, Phyllis was already waiting on the porch swing, a plastic container balanced on her knees. Lemon bars, still warm. "You look like you've been to church," Phyllis said, eyeing her friend. "In a way, I have," Lori replied, setting her purse down. Phyllis followed her inside, the faint squeak of her orthopedic shoes trailing behind. The two women had known each other since their county days, when paperwork meant permanence and signatures meant leverage. They sat at the small round table by the window. The air carried a hint of baked sugar and lemon zest. Phyllis peeled back the plastic wrap, her eyes narrowing. "She really rolled her eyes at you?" Lori smiled without warmth. "Not the first time." She poured tea into two matching cups, blue willow china, a wedding gift. The same set Maddie had once called vintage in that careful tone that meant outdated. "But," Lori continued, It's the last time she does it to a property owner. Phyllis gave a short, satisfied nod. So what's next? Lori opened the folder on the table, the old one labeled Hale Trust, 1998. The edges were soft from age, corners frayed. Inside, each tabbed divider held a relic of her husband's foresight: deeds, signatures, tax receipts, trust statements. She turned each page with the tenderness of memory but the precision of purpose. "I want it clean," she said finally. "No confusion, no shared clauses. If it's mine, it's mine. If it's theirs, they'll learn where it ends." Phyllis broke a lemon bar neatly in two, the powdered sugar dusting the table like snowfall. "You're not playing small this time?" Lori looked out the window toward the main house. The curtains were open. Maddie moved inside, a phone to her ear, laughter sharp and practiced. "No," Lori said. "I'm just playing correctly." They sipped in silence for a while, the clock ticking between them like a metronome. Each sound felt deliberate, grounding. By late afternoon, the sky had shifted from pewter to pale gold. Lori stacked the signed photocopies neatly in a folder marked Transfer Requests, Draft. She slid it into her bag with the careful satisfaction of someone who finally found the missing piece of a long puzzle. Phyllis rose, brushed the crumbs from her lap. "I'll check in with the county clerk, see who's handling property filings now. Might still be some old names we can trust." Lori nodded. "I'll call Grant in the morning. He'll know the next step." They stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of wet leaves and something faintly metallic, autumn turning the air. Across the yard, the main house windows glowed, warm but distant. Josie's little bicycle was tipped over near the walkway, one handlebar resting in the grass. Lori crossed over, set it upright, and brushed a smear of mud from the pink frame. "Forgotten, like everything else," she murmured. Phyllis touched her arm lightly. "You all right?" Lori's gaze stayed on the house. "I am now." The two women parted at dusk, Phyllis heading for her sedan, Lori standing by the fence until the tail lights disappeared. The guest house lights flickered on automatically, soft yellow spilling across the yard. Inside, Lori returned to her desk, opened her planner, and wrote a single line in careful cursive. "Begin full reclamation process. No delays." The pen tip lingered on the page before she underlined the words once. Outside, Maddie's laughter rose faintly again, muffled by distance and glass. Lori listened for Ethan's voice. Still nothing. She closed the planner, slid it beneath the deed folder, and whispered into the still air of the room. "Half mine," and she forgot. The clock ticked once, then again. And somewhere in the dark of that quiet Lexington yard, a new line, one invisible but absolute, was being drawn. The courthouse district smelled faintly of rain and copier ink when Lori arrived, the kind of morning that made you believe things could quietly change without anyone noticing. She parked beneath the bare-limbed oaks, checked her lipstick in the rearview mirror, and smoothed the front of her cardigan. There was no tremor in her hands. Not today. Grant met her at the door holding a folder thick enough to require both hands. His office felt brighter than it had before, sunlight bouncing off framed diplomas and the brass scales on his desk. The hum of the HVAC system was steady, almost soothing. "Morning, Lori." She nodded once. "Let's make it official." He motioned her toward the conference table where three neat piles of documents waited. Each stack was clipped and tabbed, Grant's handwriting marking where she'd sign. A pen lay centered between them, sleek, black, and heavier than it looked. "This first set," he said, tapping the top page, "transfers title on the guest house and its immediate parcel back into your sole ownership. No co-tenancy, no survivorship." He watched her face as she read, but she gave nothing away. The legal language was dry, deliberate. Each line a small incision, cutting away the things she no longer wished to share. She signed the first page, then the second, then another. Initial here, Grant murmured. She did. This next section removes Ethan and Madison's survivorship clauses. Their mortgage applies only to the primary residence now. It's clean. She glanced up. And they'll know? Not immediately, he said carefully. When they pull records or try to refinance, yes. But not until then. Lori's pen hovered a moment before it touched paper again. I'm not hiding, she said quietly. I'm just not explaining. Grant smiled a little. Understood. He handed her the final document, one printed on thick cream stock with a gold county emblem embossed in the corner. This one establishes a deferred trust, he said. For your granddaughter, restricted until age 25, non-accessible by her parents. The name, Josie E. Hale, sat centered on the page. Something softened in Lori's chest. A warmth, faint but undeniable. Make sure she's protected, she said. She will be. It's ironclad. She signed one last time. When it was done, Grant gathered the stack carefully, aligning the edges like he was restoring order to a fragile thing. He slid them into a manila envelope, sealed it with a practiced press of his palm, and stood. I'll file the ownership changes and the trust paperwork at the county today. By Monday, everything's official. Lori reached for her purse, but paused. Charles always said paper outlives noise. Grant tilted his head. He wasn't wrong. She smiled faintly, more in memory than in humor, and stood. The drive home was long and unhurried. The sky had brightened into a patchwork of soft clouds, and the trees along Richmond Road had begun to turn copper at their edges. A radio preacher's voice murmured from a nearby car at a red light. Somewhere in town, a leaf blower droned. Ordinary life, going on without her. When she turned onto her own street, she slowed near the familiar white picket fence. The main house gleamed behind it, fresh paint, trimmed hedges, the porch swing she'd once stained herself. It looked tidy from the road. From a distance, you couldn't see the small fractures. She parked by the guest house and stepped out, gravel crunching beneath her shoes. The afternoon sun caught in the window glass, blinding her for a moment. She shielded her eyes, then noticed it, the cracked tile at the base of the steps, the one Maddie had promised to replace last spring. A thin split ran diagonally through the ceramic, a hairline scar filled with dirt. Lori crouched, tracing it with her finger. I'll fix it myself, she murmured. She straightened, brushed off her knees, and looked toward the main house. Curtains fluttered in an upstairs window. Someone moved behind them, just a flash of color, maybe Maddie's blouse. But the curtain fell still again. Inside her guest house, she set her purse down, the weight of signed documents still heavy within it. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and dust. She opened the drawer of her desk, placed the sealed envelope beneath the old deed folder, and locked it. The click was quiet, but final. Standing there, she caught her reflection in the window, calm, composed, steady. The face of someone who'd finally remembered what authority looked like. From the yard came the soft sound of a door shutting, a voice calling for Josie to come inside. Lori closed her eyes, just listening. The line had been drawn, and for the first time in a long while, Lori Hale felt something close to peace. Not because she'd won, but because no one yet knew she had. Saturday brought sunlight that looked almost forgiving, soft through the kitchen window, glinting off the bird bath outside the guest house. Lori stood at her counter, folding a linen towel, when she heard the familiar sound of the gate creak open. The steps on the walkway were light, deliberate. Maddie never came by unannounced unless she wanted something. Lori didn't move to open the door. She let the knock come, 3 polite taps. Hey, Lori. You home? Maddie's voice carried that practiced cheerfulness that always seemed half an octave too bright. Lori opened the door just wide enough to fill the frame. Morning. Oh, good. You are here. Maddie smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Her hair was pinned neatly, yoga gear pristine, the sort of put-togetherness that looked effortful. I was just talking to Ethan about the kitchen. We might knock down that back wall, open it up, maybe add French doors to overlook the yard. Wouldn't that make the whole space feel lighter? Lori watched her, face unreadable. The sun caught the faint smear of foundation along Maddie's jaw. Lighter, she repeated. That's one word for it. Maddie laughed lightly, misreading the tone. You know me, always rearranging. Maybe we'll put in a big island too, where that old dining table is? Oh, and a skylight. Ethan said it might cost more, but… Kitchen renovations are expensive? Lori interrupted, her voice steady, not unkind. Sometimes more than people expect. Maddie hesitated, just a flicker. Well, yes, but we've got some equity to lean on now, and Ethan's been talking about a refinance. Lori folded her arms loosely. Has he? A small pause lingered. Maddie smiled again, but this time it faltered. Anyway, I should let you get back to your morning. I just thought you might want to see what we're planning for the property. It'll really modernize the whole look. Lori's gaze shifted past her, toward the manicured lawn they both pretended was shared. You've always had a talent for appearances, she said quietly. Maddie's brow creased, confusion first, then irritation masked as politeness. Well, enjoy your day then. Lori nodded once and closed the door gently, the latch catching with a soft click. She didn't offer tea. Not this time. By early afternoon, Phyllis arrived with a clipboard and a canvas tote full of bubble wrap and sticky labels. Ready for round one? She asked, her tone brisk. Let's start in the living room, Lori said. Together they moved through the guest house, room by room, drawer by drawer. Phyllis wrote in her small, looping script while Lori pointed, measured, remembered. The smell of furniture polish mingled with lemon cleaner. Antique mantel clock, solid oak, 1947, Phyllis murmured as she jotted notes. Appraised at $400 last time? $5, Lori corrected. Market's gone up. Phyllis nodded. You keeping this one? For Josie, Lori said. One day. They moved to the bookshelf, spines cracked, dust jackets faded, a lifetime of small histories. Heirlooms by room, Lori said softly. Value second, meaning first. Phyllis smiled faintly. That's the only order that lasts. Hours passed like that. Quiet, methodical, the steady shuffle of memories being sorted into purpose. When Phyllis left, the sun had shifted west, leaving long shadows across the hardwood floors. The house felt lighter, not emptier, just organized in a way that made sense only to the person who had done the sorting. Lori brewed tea but didn't pour a second cup. The ritual felt enough on its own. A soft knock came, lighter than Maddie's had been. She opened the door to find Josie standing there, clutching a crayon drawing. The paper edges were bent, a pink smudge at the corner where she'd held it too tightly. Grandma, Josie said shyly, I made your house with flowers. The drawing showed a square with blue windows and a big looping fence, stick figure flowers in every color. In the corner, a small heart with J+G scrawled inside. Lori crouched down to eye level. It's perfect. Daddy said you like yellow flowers best. Lori smiled, small, aching. He remembered right. Josie grinned, then skipped back toward the main house, ponytail bouncing. Lori stood at the doorway watching her go, the paper fluttering in her hand. She turned it over, wrote neatly on the back, Legacy, loved. She walked to her desk, slid the drawing into a clear sleeve, and filed it behind the thick folders that now defined her life. The guest house grew quiet again, the kind of stillness that feels earned. Outside, the wind stirred the porch swing just enough to make it creak. Through the window, Lori caught a glimpse of Maddie pacing across the lawn, phone pressed to her ear, the tight set of her shoulders betraying nerves. Lori watched her for a long moment, then let the curtain fall closed. Her tea had gone cold on the counter. She lifted the cup anyway, took a sip, and whispered, almost to herself, she won't see the next wall coming either. By Wednesday, the world outside the guest house had settled into its usual suburban hum. Leaf blowers, barking dogs, and the soft rattle of delivery trucks coasting down Cloverleaf Drive. But inside, Lori's world had quietly tilted. She was sitting at her desk when the phone rang. Grant's name glowed on the caller ID. "Everything filed?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Filed, stamped, and recorded," Grant said, his voice calm, almost casual. "You now hold full title on all parcels under the Hale property. No co-ownership remains. Ethan and Madison's claim has been formally dissolved." Lori let the words settle, slow and deliberate, like a sip of hot tea. "So it's done." "It's done," he confirmed. "And airtight. I added an affidavit of competency for good measure. No one can claim you weren't clear-minded. If anyone tries to contest, they'll have to prove prior standing, which," he added with the faintest humor, "they no longer have." Lori smiled faintly. Perfect. She thanked him, hung up, and stared at the papers laid out before her. Utility bills, insurance statements, household records, each one a quiet remnant of their shared life. Her pen glided with steady precision as she crossed through Ethan's name on each line, adding her initials beside the change. Water, electric, insurance, all transferred to her account alone. The click of her pen was the only sound in the room. Outside, a car door slammed. Then voices, Maddie's sharp edge cutting through the crisp morning air. Lori walked to the window and saw her daughter-in-law standing beside Ethan's truck, a phone pressed tight to her ear, gesturing in short, irritated motions. Ethan stood nearby, hands buried deep in his pockets, eyes fixed on the gravel. "Just call them again," Maddie snapped. "There's no reason this shouldn't have gone through. We have equity in the property." Lori stepped back from the glass, her expression unreadable. She heard Maddie's voice rise again, thinner now. Frustrated. "They said the title changed? What does that even mean?" Lori returned to her desk and opened a fresh folder, labeled neatly in her handwriting, "Post-transfer adjustments." By evening, Phyllis arrived, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, a manila envelope tucked under one arm. "Got the updated filing from the county," she said, tapping the edge. "You want to see your name in print?" Lori gestured toward the table. "Let's make it official." Phyllis spread the papers out with practiced precision, her finger tracing the embossed stamp. "There it is," she murmured. "Lori M. Hale, sole owner of record. Guest house, main parcel, and auxiliary structures. No secondary claimants, no survivorship." She flipped to the second page, scanning the fine print. "Listen to this clause. No right of appeal without prior standing." She looked up, smiling. "That's a poetic one, isn't it?" Lori's eyes lingered on the phrase, the corner of her mouth tightening just slightly. "Good," she said. "They no longer stand in it." Phyllis chuckled softly. "You always did like your endings clean." Lori closed the folder, set it neatly atop the stack. "I'm just restoring order." Later that night, the air smelled faintly of rain again. Through the thin glass of the window, she heard muted voices drifting from the main house. The kitchen lights were on, bright, sterile, revealing too much. Maddie's voice, sharp as glass. "They said your mother changed the title. Ethan, did you sign something?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "I didn't sign a damn thing." "Well, someone did. I told you." She handles her own paperwork. I didn't think she'd. He stopped himself. The rest came out smaller. Cut us out. Lori turned away before she could hear more. Her face was calm, but the steadiness in her pulse betrayed the satisfaction she wouldn't admit out loud. The fence between their homes suddenly felt higher, even though it hadn't changed an inch. She poured herself a small glass of sherry and sat by the window, watching the porch light flicker in the distance. At 9 o'clock, a soft knock sounded. When she opened the door, Josie stood there, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her hair was damp from a rushed bath, her eyes big with the seriousness of a child carrying adult words. Mommy said Grandma made it complicated, Josie whispered. Lori crouched down. Oh, sweetheart, she said gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes grown-ups forget who built things first. Josie frowned, thinking hard about that. But you still love us, right? Lori smiled, the kind of smile that holds both warmth and warning. More than you'll ever know. That's why I fix things before they break. Josie nodded, though she didn't quite understand. She handed Lori a crumpled sticker sheet. You can have the shiny star. For being brave. When the child ran back across the yard, Lori stood at the doorway for a long moment, the sticker glinting gold in her palm. She pressed it to the inside cover of the deed folder, right beside her signature. Then she locked the drawer, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the still air. They wanted equity. I gave them education. The guest house went dark, but the boundary between homes, legal, emotional, irrevocable, had never been brighter. The invitation came folded inside Josie's homework folder, Maddie's handwriting looping neat and careful across the top of a sticky note. Dinner tonight, 6:30. Casual. Lori read it twice before setting it on the counter. Casual, she murmured. In this family, that word had always meant controlled. By the time she walked across the yard, the November dusk had already swallowed the light. The main house glowed from within, soft amber spilling through the windows, the scent of something sweet trying too hard to seem homemade. When Ethan opened the door, his smile came quick, apologetic. Hey, Mom. Glad you could make it. Wasn't aware it was optional, she said, stepping inside. Maddie was at the stove, stirring something in a pan that hissed a second too long before she turned the burner down. Just heating up dinner. Hope you're hungry? The table was set for 4, the good plates with the chipped edges that Maddie insisted were rustic. Josie's spot had a plastic cup with a pumpkin face drawn on it in marker. Lori sat without being asked. Her seat, end of the table, nearest the window, was the one she'd always taken, even before Maddie moved in. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock on the wall, ticking too loud for comfort. Ethan cleared his throat. Looks good, honey. Mm-hmm, Maddie said. It's store-bought, but I dressed it up a little. The little was 2 sprigs of parsley and a cracked pie crust. Lori cut a neat slice, lifted her fork, and set it down again. Frozen, she said softly, not accusing, just naming what was. Maddie's jaw tightened. Well, not everyone has time for scratch baking. Lori smiled, small and polite. Of course. Ethan jumped in too quickly. So, Mom, the city's doing that fall festival again. Thought maybe Josie could show you her costume before then. She already did, Lori said. She's going as a sunflower. I bought her yellow tights. Maddie's fork scraped against her plate. You didn't have to do that. I know, Lori replied, but I wanted to. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was dense, like the air itself had decided to thicken. Josie swung her legs under the table, oblivious, humming something from her kindergarten class. So, Ethan tried again, voice pitched too high. We, talked to the bank today. Maddie's head shot up. Ethan! It's fine. he said quickly. They just said the refinance can't go through right now. Some mix-up with the property lines or something. Lori kept her eyes on her plate. Must be frustrating. It is, Maddie said, the words snapping like a twig. Apparently something changed with the deed. I mean, we'll sort it out, but it's weird how paperwork can just shift like that. Paperwork doesn't shift, Lori said quietly. People do. Ethan stared at his pie, his fork unmoving. Maddie didn't respond. The clock ticked louder. When dinner ended, Lori stood first. Thank you for the meal. Maddie's mouth twitched. Of course. Ethan followed her to the door. Mom, you know she doesn't mean anything by it. She's just stressed. I know, Lori said, pulling on her coat. But stress doesn't make someone polite. He winced. We'll figure this out. Whatever this is. She looked at him then. Really looked. I already have. Outside, the night air was sharp, the kind that tasted faintly of frost and dead leaves. The distance between their porches felt longer than ever. Back in the guest house, she set her purse down and opened the roll-top desk. The drawer slid smooth beneath her fingers, like it was waiting. From a file labeled Estate 2025, she pulled a stack of papers and uncapped her pen. Her handwriting flowed steady and practiced as she adjusted a clause here, rewrote a beneficiary there. She added one new line to the margin. Residency rights terminate upon my discretion. Her will now reflected her new clarity, everything she'd already learned to live without. As she signed her initials beside the change, she caught the faint sound of laughter drifting from the main house. Maddie's, sharp and forced. Ethan's, tired and thin. Then a smaller voice, Josie's, floating through the dark yard. Grandma, you're coming to my Halloween party, right? Lori opened the window slightly, letting the cold air and the child's warmth meet in the same space. I'll be home, sweetheart, she called back. Always home. Josie giggled and ran inside, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud. Lori watched the light go out in the kitchen window one by one, like small admissions of defeat. She turned back to her desk, picked up her pen again, and underlined one final sentence in her will. All assets retained, no co-signers. Then she smiled, a calm, private smile that didn't need an audience, and whispered into the lamplight. They wanted a home. I kept the house. The trucks arrived just after sunrise. Lori had been up since 5, sipping coffee at her kitchen table while mist curled low over the lawn. The rumble of the first contractor's engine vibrated faintly through the floorboards, a sound that felt like punctuation. When she stepped outside, the air was cold enough to turn her breath white. The men in work jackets nodded politely, their boots crunching on gravel. One of them, a thick-shouldered man with a clipboard, asked, You sure you want the full enclosure, ma'am? It'll cut off view of the main house. That's the idea, Lori said. He gave a small grin, the kind that recognized both money and motive, then waved his team forward. By mid-morning, the yard was filled with the sound of drills, hammers, and the rhythmic thunk of cedar posts sinking into soil. The smell of sawdust carried on the wind, clean, sharp, decisive. From the kitchen window of the main house, Lori could feel Maddie watching. She didn't look up to confirm it. The first section of fence rose quickly, slats lined in perfect precision. She'd chosen cedar because it aged gracefully, graying over time without losing its strength. The kind of wood that lasted decades, even when people didn't. Phyllis arrived just before noon with sandwiches and a thermos of sweet tea. You're really doing it, she said, watching the fence stretch like a new horizon. I told them 8 feet, Lori replied, not looking away. The city limits 6, but I called a friend at zoning. Phyllis gave a low whistle. And here I thought you were done pulling strings. Just tying the last ones off, Lori said. They ate on the porch, the air humming with the sound of construction. Every few minutes, the faint slam of a nail gun echoed off the houses. Across the yard, Maddie stepped outside, arms crossed tight against the wind. "Lori!" she called. "What's all this?" Lori stood, brushing crumbs from her hands. "A fence," she said simply. "I can see that," Maddie snapped. "Why do you need a fence? It makes the whole yard look divided." Lori tilted her head. "Maybe it always was?" Maddie blinked, caught off guard, then glanced toward Phyllis as if for translation. "You could have mentioned it," she said finally. "I could have," Lori agreed. "But then we'd be having this conversation twice." Maddie's lips pressed together. "Ethan's going to want to talk about this." "Then he knows where to find me," Lori said. "Or rather, where he doesn't." She turned and walked back toward the guest house, the hammering starting up again behind her, rhythmic and sure. By dusk, the last panel was in place. The yard that once stretched unbroken between the houses now stood clearly divided. Two homes, two worlds. The new gate clicked shut with a coded lock. Sturdy, unyielding. Lori programmed the keypad herself, fingers steady, the numbers deliberate. Only 2 people would know the combination. Phyllis watched her punch in the final digits. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Lori said. "You'll have the code, and Josie." "Josie?" Lori smiled softly. "She's the only one who still knocks before she enters." When Phyllis left, the sun had dropped behind the maples, leaving streaks of burnt orange and purple across the sky. The world felt smaller but safer, like she'd finally drawn the line her husband had once told her to keep clear. Lori walked the perimeter, fingertips grazing the fresh wood, feeling the faint warmth it still held from the afternoon sun. The scent of cedar lingered on her hands, grounding and new. She was halfway back to the porch when she heard the tiny rustle, then a whisper through the slats. "Grandma?" She turned. Josie's small fingers curled around the edge of the fence, her eyes peeking through the narrow gap. "Can I still draw on your porch?" she asked. "Even though there's a wall?" Lori crouched so their eyes met through the wooden seam. The girl's face was smudged with chalk dust, her hair escaping its braid. "Whenever you want," Lori said. "The porch is always open to you." Josie smiled, wide and certain, before darting back toward the house. Lori waited until she disappeared, then turned toward the fence again. She pressed her palm flat against the wood, feeling the faint heartbeat of her own pulse beneath it. The night air settled around her, quiet now that the hammers were gone. Somewhere in the main house, a door slammed, angry, sharp. But the sound died quickly, muffled by the new boundary. Inside, she sat at her desk and crossed out one more name on her emergency contact sheet. Ethan's. She added Phyllis instead. Then, with steady hands, she wrote the new gate code across the top corner of her planner, J25, the month and day of Josie's birthday. Through the window, the fence stood tall, casting long shadows across the lawn like an unbroken line between what was hers and what was merely near. Lori exhaled slowly, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the edge of her mouth. "Walls don't divide," she whispered into the quiet. "They protect." And on the other side of that cedar wall, Maddie's porch light flickered once, then went out. The courier from the county clerk's office arrived just after 9, a polite young man in a windbreaker, balancing a padded envelope against his chest. Lori met him at the gate, pressed the code, and waited for the latch to click open. "Delivery for Ms. Hale," he said, offering the envelope with the reverence of someone who knew it held weight. She signed without small talk, her pen firm, her signature unshaken. Inside the guest house, the morning light slanted through the blinds in narrow gold bands. The air still carried the faint resin smell of the new cedar fence. She sat at her desk, slit the envelope with her letter opener, and spread out the documents like cards in a winning hand. At the top, Commonwealth of Kentucky, official record of property transfer. Below that, a stack of notarized pages, Grant's familiar signature anchoring each one, blue ink pressed deep into the paper. A separate folder contained stamped time receipts from the county server, proof of submission. Everything aligned to the minute. Grant's email pinged seconds later. Filed, confirmed, indexed, competency affidavit attached. Phyllis's witness statement notarized. No room for dispute. Lori leaned back, letting the glow of the screen reflect in her glasses. For a long moment, she simply watched the cursor blink at the end of Grant's last line, the sound of certainty. By late morning, Phyllis arrived with her usual efficiency and a bag of paperwork tucked under one arm. "Got the affidavit copy?" she said, pulling it free. "County seal's already embossed. I made sure they did it while I was standing there. Some things you don't leave to chance." Lori smiled. "You always did believe in witnessing the witness." "Someone has to." Phyllis set the paper down, flattening its edge with her palm. "Everything's airtight. Even if Ethan or Maddie tried to challenge it, they wouldn't get past the first page." Lori opened a new binder on her desk, a fresh 3-ring with a white spine label. She slid a typed title sheet into the front sleeve. Ownership, non-negotiable. Inside, she began organizing each document by category: deeds, affidavits, financial letters, executor details, every piece sealed in its own protective sleeve. The rhythm of it was soothing, control translated into plastic and paper. Phyllis watched her work for a moment, then said quietly, "You're removing Ethan from the healthcare proxy today, right?" Lori paused, her pen hovering over the line of the form. "Yes." "You sure?" "Phyllis," she said, signing her name. "A son who won't raise his voice, won't raise a hand if something goes wrong. I need someone who can act, not hesitate." Phyllis nodded. "Then I'll sign as secondary." They both looked up when the doorbell chimed. The softer chime Lori had installed after Charles's passing, less intrusive than the old brass one. It was Helen Rivers from the church. Silver hair, warm eyes, the kind of woman who carried casseroles like apologies. She stood on the porch holding a basket lined with a gingham towel. "Morning, Lori," she said. "Brought you some of my buttermilk biscuits. Heard you've been busy with paperwork." The pause before paperwork was gentle, but deliberate. "Thank you, Helen," Lori said, accepting the basket. "You always know when to arrive with carbs." Helen laughed softly, though her eyes darted toward the towering fence behind her. "You know how folks talk, honey. Words going around. Something about deeds and lawyers and, well, I just told them if anyone's earned the right to manage her own house, it's you." Lori met her gaze without flinching. "Let it," she said. Helen blinked. "Pardon?" "Let it go around. Gossip's just a town's way of filing minutes without paper." Phyllis smirked behind her. Helen's cheeks pinked. "Well, I didn't mean—" "I know," Lori said, softening. "But people can talk all they want. I'm done explaining the roof over my own head." Helen handed her the biscuits, nodded, and retreated down the walkway, the sound of her footsteps fading into the wind. When the house quieted again, Lori sat at her desk, tore a small piece from the biscuit, and placed it on a napkin beside her tea. Crumbs scattered across the open binder, catching bits of afternoon light. She turned to the final section of her file, legal and medical. Ethan's name appeared twice, written in black ink from years earlier. She drew one clean line through both entries, replaced them with Phyllis Carr, primary proxy. Her handwriting looked steady, deliberate. Outside, the fence stood unmoved by the wind. Lori glanced at her reflection in the window, a woman outlined by papers, sunlight, and cedar shadows, and thought of Charles's voice, faint but certain. "Always know what's yours, Lori, and keep proof." She closed the binder, the snap of the rings sealing more than paper. Across the yard, Maddie's laughter floated faintly through the air, high, brittle, a sound trying too hard to disguise its edge. Lori stood, pressed her hand against the cool surface of the binder, and whispered, "The deed's the only truth they can't twist." Then, as if the house itself had been waiting for the line, the porch light flickered once, twice, before going out entirely. It started on a Sunday morning, bright, quiet, deceptively kind. Lori was sitting at her kitchen table, a half-eaten biscuit beside her, when Phyllis texted, "You might want to check Facebook." Lori wasn't much for social media. Her account was mostly dormant, except for the rare post about Josie's school recital or the neighborhood's 4th of July picnic. But she knew Maddie posted often: recipes, gym selfies, quotes about boundaries and gratitude. This wasn't one of those. Maddie's post sat at the top of the feed, public for anyone to see. Imagine building your family's life on land that suddenly isn't yours anymore. Imagine your mother-in-law forgetting to mention she's rewritten your home into her own name. Some people use lawyers instead of love. 100 little blue thumbs floated under the paragraph, punctuated by a few sympathetic comments. "That's awful, girl. You deserve better." Sounds like elder abuse in reverse. Lori's hands didn't shake as she took a screenshot, then another, scrolling just enough to capture the comments. She saved each image into a folder on her desktop titled Documentation, Public Statements. When she was done, she printed them, one by one. The hum of the printer was steady, almost soothing. She slipped the pages into a plastic sleeve and filed them neatly behind a tab in her estate binder labeled Behavioral Evidence. The folder snapped shut with a sound that felt like punctuation. That afternoon, she sat by the window with her tea cooling beside her and began drafting her obituary. It wasn't an act of morbidity, it was an act of authorship. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Loretta M. Hale, 1957, blank, for now." She wrote the rest with the clarity of someone writing the last chapter of her own book. Survived by her beloved granddaughter, Josephine E. Hale. Preceded in death by her husband, Charles Hale. No mention of Ethan. No mention of Maddie. Her pen paused over the blank space where their names might have gone, and she allowed herself a single breath of silence. Then she drew a firm line through it and moved on. By midweek, Phyllis stopped by with her notary stamp and a new codicil in hand. The paper was crisp, still smelling faintly of ink and toner. "This one locks Josie's rights even tighter," Phyllis said, laying it on the table. "No early access, no parental interference. The property transfers directly to her trust at 25. That's final." Lori read every word. Then she signed. Phyllis pressed the stamp hard against the corner, the embossed seal glinting in the light. "That's that." "Good," Lori said softly. "I don't plan on leaving questions." They sat for a while after that, the afternoon sun stretching thin across the kitchen floor. Phyllis poured tea and said, "You know she's going to keep posting." "Let her," Lori said. "People who shout online rarely act in person." Phyllis smirked. "You've got the quieter kind of power." Lori looked at the binder on the counter, its weight almost comforting. Quiet power lasts longer. That evening, just before dusk, a knock sounded at the gate, small, polite, 2 quick taps. Lori recognized the rhythm instantly. She opened the code lock, the cedar gate creaking softly as she pulled it aside. Josie stood there with a sheet of paper clutched in both hands, eyes bright. "I made you another one," she said. Lori crouched down, smiling. "Let me see." The drawing showed the guest house again, but this time, the flowers around it had grown taller, reaching almost to the roof. At the top, in big crooked letters, it read, "This is your house forever." Lori felt something warm rise in her chest, something soft, unarmored. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." I told Mommy you should live here forever, Josie said proudly. She said that's complicated, but I said it's not. Lori's throat tightened, but her smile didn't waver. You're right. It's not. Josie beamed, then added in a whisper, Can I keep a secret? Of course. I like your house better. It smells like lemon cookies. Lori laughed quietly, brushing a hand over the girl's hair. You can come here anytime, Josie. The gate knows your birthday. Josie giggled, not quite understanding, and ran off toward the main house, the drawing still fluttering between them like a promise. Inside, Lori slipped the paper into a new folder labeled in her neat handwriting, to be opened at 25. She slid it beside the trust documents, aligning the edges perfectly. The gate clicked shut outside, locking itself in the cooling air. The evening settled, quiet, still, wholly hers. For the first time in months, Lori didn't check her phone, didn't glance toward the main house's windows, didn't listen for voices. The world beyond her cedar fence could talk, type, whisper all it wanted. Inside these walls, her story was written, signed, notarized, and sealed. She poured herself another cup of tea, lifted it in a small private toast, and murmured, They can post whatever they like. I kept what matters. And as the porch light glowed softly against the night, the only sound left was the hum of the coded lock clicking once, closing for good. The first chill of November carried a whisper of frost across the roofs on Cloverleaf Drive. Lori woke to the sound of dry leaves scraping the window glass, nature's gentle reminder that everything, eventually, sheds. By mid-morning, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring out. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. She played it once. Then again, slower. Maddie's voice, tight with anger and panic. You're going to bankrupt your family, Lori. Do you even understand what you've done? Ethan's credit is tanking because of you. Our refinance was denied. They said the title isn't in both names anymore. We can't get a loan. Can't fix the roof. Can't even access the home equity. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's cruel. Fix it. There was a shaky exhale at the end, the sound of Maddie realizing she'd said too much before hanging up. Lori sat at her desk, listening to the message once more, her finger hovering above the replay button before she clicked save instead of delete. She opened a folder on her computer, created a new subfile labeled manipulation attempts, and uploaded the audio clip. Then she transcribed it word for word, every tremor, every accusation, onto a single printed sheet. She placed it in a new sleeve within her binder, between behavioral evidence and legal correspondence. When she shut the binder, the sound was firm, deliberate, the closing of a door. That afternoon, she met Phyllis at Grant Taylor's office. Grant was running behind, so the two women waited in the quiet lobby, a muted television flickering above the reception desk with local news about leaf collection schedules and rising mortgage rates. Phyllis sipped her coffee. Heard the bank's already sent your son a denial letter. I expected as much, Lori said. They built their comfort on borrowed ceilings. Those fall faster than you think. Phyllis smiled behind her cup. You sound almost biblical. I sound awake. When Grant appeared, sleeves rolled up and tie slightly askew, he nodded at Lori's folder. Ready for this last step? Completely. In the conference room, she reviewed the final draft of her power of attorney revision. The new form listed only one name, Phyllis Carr. No alternates, no contingencies. Lori initialed each page, her signature steady. That should cover everything. Grant glanced over the papers. It does. No one but Phyllis can act on your behalf now. If your son or his wife try, they won't have standing to request a copy. Lori folded the signed document, slid it into her folder, and smiled faintly. That's fine. They've already misplaced enough paper. Back home, she brewed tea, the scent of chamomile mixing with the faint tang of autumn air drifting through the cracked kitchen window. Outside, the maple tree by her fence had turned fully red, its leaves falling like small, soft verdicts. She took her cup and walked to the garden. The ground was cool, damp with the morning's dew. From this spot, she could see both roofs, the main house's and her own, but the fence made them look like different worlds. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. "We can't do this anymore, Mom." Ethan. No greeting, no signature. Just that. She turned the phone face down on the table beside her tea. A few moments later, she opened her checkbook. Her handwriting, always neat, looped steady as she filled out the line. Pay to the order of Lexington Youth Art League. Amount, $1,000 memo. In honor of Josephine E. Hale, future creator. She tore the check carefully, slid it into an envelope, and pressed it closed. The gesture wasn't about spite. It was about redirection. Some gifts bypass generations. When the mail carrier came by later, she handed it over personally. "This one's important," she said. He nodded, slipping it into the canvas bag with a thud that sounded heavier than paper. As the sun began to dip, Lori settled on the garden bench with her tea, steam curling into the air. The faint rustle of the cedar fence blended with the sound of distant laughter from children walking home from school. She thought about Josie's drawings, how every version of Grandma's house had flowers, color, joy, how none of them ever included the main house at all. She smiled at that, soft, reflective. A gust of wind swept through the yard, scattering a handful of crimson leaves across her lap. She brushed them away, one by one, until her hand stilled over a single perfect yellow one, the kind Josie always drew. She placed it between the pages of her planner, pressing it flat. When she looked back toward the house, the lights inside the main home flickered once, then dimmed completely. She could almost picture Maddie pacing, phone in hand, frustration folding over itself. Lori lifted her tea, her voice barely above the wind. "They wanted credit," she murmured, "but they never learned value." The garden fell silent except for the rustling leaves. The gate lock clicked once, secure, final. And Lori Hale sat there, motionless and calm, watching the daylight bleed into dusk, as if the world itself had begun quietly confirming her ownership. The appraisal report came on a Tuesday morning, printed on thick paper that smelled faintly of ink and dust. Lori unfolded it at her kitchen table, the same place where she'd once reviewed Josie's crayon drawings. Appraised market value, $612,000. She let her eyes linger on the number. Neither pride nor surprise, just quiet confirmation. Her husband had built this land with calloused hands and careful math. She'd preserved it with sharper tools, patience, paperwork, and silence. Across the yard, frost still clung to the grass. Maddie's car idled in the driveway, the sound low and uncertain, before reversing out. No wave, no glance toward the guest house. Lori folded the appraisal neatly and slid it into a manila envelope labeled Final Valuations. It was the move she'd never made, the one she'd been told to years ago, when people had urged her to just sell, simplify, start fresh. But this land wasn't a possession. It was a record. Selling it would have been erasure. Instead, she chose preservation. By late afternoon, she was at Grant Taylor's office again. He met her with his usual calm professionalism, the kind that made even the most decisive acts feel procedural. "Everything looks in order," he said, flipping through her documents. "The property's officially non-transferable until your death. No liens, no sale authorization clauses. You've locked it." "Good," Lori said. "It should stay exactly as it is." Grant nodded. "You're thinking long-term now." "I always was. I'm just writing it down." He handed her a small stack of freshly notarized pages. "This is your final codicil. Josie inherits the full estate at 25. No parental access or oversight. It transfers through a restricted trust. Only she can claim it, and only then. Lori's pen didn't hesitate as she signed. When she's old enough to know the difference between ownership and entitlement, she'll know it was earned. Grant gave her a measured look. She'll thank you one day. Lori smiled faintly. She already does. She just doesn't know it yet. That evening, Phyllis came by with a small fireproof lockbox, the kind she used to keep marriage licenses and old love letters. She set it on the table with a heavy clunk. Here she is, Phyllis said, certified heat-resistant up to 1,700 degrees. If this thing ever burns, it'll outlast the house itself. Lori opened it, lined the bottom with a folded linen cloth, and began stacking the contents carefully inside. The codicil, the trust statement, the notarized appraisal, and one freshly written envelope marked for Josie to be opened when you're ready. Inside that letter she'd written in her neat, looping script, "One day, this will be yours, and you'll know why I waited and why I stayed. Some things you inherit in silence first." When she sealed it, her fingers lingered over the flap. The paper felt warm, alive with purpose. Phyllis handed her a small roll of duct tape. "For extra insurance." Lori smiled. "You never did trust locks alone." "Locks are for other people," Phyllis said. "Tapes for certainty." They both laughed softly, the rare, genuine kind that carried years of shared history in it. Phyllis watched as Lori placed the box on the lowest shelf of her study, behind a row of books. She noted how precise her friend's movements were, like a chess player finishing a match she'd already won hours earlier. "You're sure you're done?" Phyllis asked. "Done with chaos," Lori said. "Not with clarity." When Phyllis left, night had already settled over the neighborhood. The fence gleamed faintly under the porch light, the kind of stillness that felt earned. Lori returned to her desk for one last task. She opened her funeral file, a slim tan folder labeled Personal Directives. The checklist was nearly complete. Arrangements prepaid, music selected, interment beside Charles reserved. She added one final note in bold pen at the bottom of the page: "No family eulogies permitted." Phyllis to read Charles's poem only. She capped her pen, slid the folder closed, and leaned back in her chair. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of Maddie's living room across the yard. Voices carried, muffled, sharp, then fading. Lori let the silence reclaim the air. She'd built her own piece plank by plank, signature by signature, and now it stood untouchable. A wind rustled through the yard, scattering the last of the maple leaves across the grass. The fence caught them like a keeper of secrets. Lori reached over, tapped the fireproof box once, almost like knocking on a future door, and whispered, "Stay with her, even when I can't." Then she switched off the lamp, leaving the guest house bathed in moonlight. Outside, the coded lock on the gate blinked once in acknowledgement, sealed, secure, and waiting for the next hale woman to find her way home. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, the kind you buy in a rush at a gas station counter. No return address, just her name, L. M. Hale, written in Ethan's familiar, slanted handwriting. It sat on the entry table all morning while she watered her ferns and fed the neighbor's cat through the fence slats. She didn't open it until afternoon, when the shadows had lengthened across the yard and the house felt like it was holding its breath. Inside was one sheet of lined paper, folded twice, written in uneven strokes. "Mom, I've been meaning to say I'm sorry for how things have been, for not standing up sooner, for letting distance become habit. Maddie's upset, but I think she'll come around. Maybe we all just need a reset. You've always been strong. I guess I took that for granted. I hope we can talk soon. E. No closing, no love, and noticeably, no second signature." Lori read it once, then again, slower. The ink stopped halfway down the page as if the pen itself had hesitated, torn between confession and convenience. She could almost see Ethan sitting at his desk, eyes flicking toward Maddie to gauge how much apology was acceptable before it looked like surrender. She folded the letter neatly, pressed the crease flat, and set it beside her planner. Then she took a fresh piece of stationery, ivory, unlined, and wrote in her careful script, "Ethan, space has served us both. Let's leave it that way." Mom. No flourish, no bitterness, just clarity. She sealed it, placed it on the table by the door, and let it sit there, unstamped, unsent. The next morning, Phyllis arrived early, the cold nipping at her cheeks, a thermos in one hand and a legal envelope in the other. "Grant said he needs one more signature," she said, breath fogging in the air. "This'll make the living trust irrevocable. No one can touch it. Not even you." Lori smiled faintly. "That's the point, isn't it?" They sat at the kitchen table, the binder open between them like a sacred text. Phyllis placed the document in front of her, steadying it with one hand. Lori uncapped her pen, the same dark blue one she'd used for every major decision in her life, and signed on the line. Her name, Loretta M. Hale, flowed across the paper with a firmness that didn't require witnesses. Still, Phyllis signed as one anyway. "Done," she said softly. "The walls are permanent now." Lori exhaled through her nose, the sound halfway between relief and reflection. "Funny," she murmured. "When Charles built this place, we never imagined permanence would need this much paperwork." Phyllis chuckled, capping her pen. "Men build houses. Women fortify them." They shared a look, the kind of quiet understanding that doesn't need history explained. By afternoon, an email pinged from Grant Taylor. Subject: Confirmation Lori. All filings complete. Your trust, codicils, and power of attorney are recorded as irrevocable. Everything's now airtight. Grant. She read the line twice, then closed the laptop. It felt final. Not the kind of final that mourns, but the kind that steadies. The house was still. Even the wind had quieted outside. She took a small box from the drawer beside her desk, a simple brown one with a faint floral print Josie had picked out months ago at the craft store. Inside was a coloring book, its cover bright with cartoon animals and open skies. No note, no message, just the gift of blank pages waiting for color. She wrapped it in plain paper, addressed it in her looping script, and placed it by the door with the letter to Ethan. Only one would be mailed. That evening, as the light dimmed and the frost began creeping up the window panes, Lori sat by the fire with a cup of tea. The world outside was hushed. Just the faint sound of distant tires on cold asphalt and a single wind chime knocking out of rhythm. She glanced toward the door, where the coloring book parcel waited to be sent. The envelope beneath it, the one addressed to Ethan, lay untouched. She reached over, slid the letter out, and fed it to the flame. The paper curled inward, edges blackening, the ink disappearing faster than words deserved. She watched it burn until the last corner folded into ash. Then she leaned back, the firelight soft against her face, and whispered. Not to anyone, but the silence itself. "I used to think forgiveness was something you gave. Turns out, it's something you stop needing." Outside, the coded lock on the gate clicked once, resetting itself. And in that small sound, the quiet finality of metal returning to place, Lori Hale felt the olive branch snap cleanly, leaving nothing but peace in her hands. The knock came just before dusk. 3 heavy, uneven thuds that carried through the guest house like the echo of a memory she hadn't decided to keep. Lori looked up from her desk, pen still in hand. Outside, the sky was the color of wet slate, the air thick with the smell of rain that hadn't started yet. She knew that knock. The hesitation between the second and third hit gave it away. It was Ethan's. She rose, her joints protesting faintly, and crossed the small living room. Through the lace curtain, she saw him standing on the other side of the cedar gate, shoulders hunched, hands jammed into his jacket pockets. The porch light from the main house cast a narrow halo behind him. He didn't call out, just stood there, head bowed, like a boy caught between guilt and courage. Lori pressed the gate code. The lock beeped, then clicked open with a sound that always comforted her. Tonight, it sounded heavier. When she swung the gate aside, Ethan stepped forward, eyes red, lips chapped from the cold. He looked older than 38, like regret had aged him faster than time ever could. "Mom," he said, voice cracking on the single word. "Ethan." Her tone was calm, neutral, the kind you use when a storm's already passed and you're just waiting for the last drop. He swallowed hard, breath visible in the fading light. "I didn't know how to stop it." Lori studied him for a long moment. His eyes were pleading, but his hands were still in his pockets. He'd come to talk, not to change. "You didn't try," she said quietly. His face collapsed at that, not in anger but in something deeper. Shame, maybe, the kind that came too late. "I thought," he began, then stopped. "I thought it would just fix itself. Maddie said it was all misunderstanding, that we'd sort it out. But then everything kept slipping away." "It didn't slip," Lori said. "It was taken. And I took it back." He blinked, rain beginning to pepper his hair. "I never wanted it to be like this." "No one ever does," she said. "But you let her draw the lines for too long, and I built new ones." Ethan stepped closer, his shoes scraping the damp stone. "Mom, please, whatever you're doing, undo it." "Maddie's furious. She thinks—" Lori's eyebrows lifted just enough to stop him mid-sentence. "I know what she thinks." The silence stretched. The only sound was the soft whine of wind threading through the fence slats. Lori reached behind the door and picked up a sealed manila folder, the one she'd placed there hours earlier, as if her hands had known before her heart did that this moment would come. She held it out to him. "Here." He hesitated. "What is it?" "The deed," she said. "Not yours, not mine. Just proof of what's already true." He took it slowly, eyes darting over the closed flap like it might burn. "I don't understand." "That's been the problem, hasn't it?" she said softly. "You keep trying to understand this as punishment." He looked up, rain beating on his lashes. "Isn't it?" Lori shook her head. "No, Ethan. It was never punishment. It was protection." He blinked. "Protection from what?" She held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "From inheritance you weren't ready to carry, from a woman who mistakes possession for love, from yourself." His throat tightened, a visible swallow. The paper in his hands crinkled slightly under the tension. "You're freezing us out." "I'm giving you distance," she said. "You'll survive it. You always have." For a moment she thought he might say something more, some small phrase that could rewind a decade of silence. But he only nodded once, like a man signing an invisible contract he didn't read. The wind picked up. The first drop of rain landed between them. Lori stepped back toward the doorway, one hand on the knob. "You can go now," she said softly. "You'll find peace on your side of the fence eventually." Ethan's voice broke. "Mom, please." Her eyes softened, just barely. "I'm still your mother. But I'm done being your safety net." He looked down at the folder, then back at her, eyes glassy. "I don't know how to fix this." Lori exhaled, the air trembling like something released. "You don't have to," she said. "I already did." She stepped inside, the porch light casting her silhouette across the rain-slick ground. Then, without another word, she closed the door, slowly, carefully, like sealing a vault. The latch clicked once. Then, from the other side, the distinct sound of the gate lock re-engaging. The code light blinked red. Ethan stood in the rain, the manila folder pressed to his chest, the sound of his mother's lock echoing longer than her voice ever had. Inside, Lori leaned against the door, eyes closed. Her pulse was steady, her breath even. Through the muted glass, she could see his shape standing there, motionless, until the porch light flickered and went out. Only then did she whisper, almost tenderly, "Some gates were never meant to open twice." The ground was still soft from last night's rain when Lori stepped outside with her gardening gloves and a flat of bronze and yellow mums. The air held the clean chill of late November, sharp enough to wake the senses but kind enough to work in. She walked to the place where the old stone walkway had once connected the guest house to the main house, a narrow strip now swallowed by grass. Years of footsteps had once pressed the stones smooth. Ethan's in work boots, Josie's in sneakers, Maddie's in heels that clicked too loudly on quiet mornings. Now it was just her. Lori knelt and began breaking the soil with her trowel, dark and fragrant. Each motion was measured, almost ritual. She'd bought the mums the day before from the nursery near Richmond Road, the same one she and Charles had gone to every fall. He used to joke that mums were the last stubborn color before winter shut the lights off. She smiled at the memory and set the first plant into the earth. When the row was finished, she brushed dirt from her gloves and placed a small metal bench between the flowers. On its backrest gleamed a newly installed plaque, "Seen, prepared, unbothered." Phyllis had the engraving done, claiming she'd stolen the words from one of Lori's old to-do lists. "They suit you better than any epitaph," she'd said when it arrived. Lori sat on the bench now, the metal cool beneath her palms. From here, she could see both houses, the guest house wrapped in calm, the main one behind its curtains, silent and watchful. The distance between them had never felt so wide or so right. Inside, the scent of soil followed her as she sat at her desk. Her legacy binder lay open beside a neat stack of envelopes, each one dated in black ink and sealed with a single piece of gold tape. Letters for Josie, 15 in total, one for every birthday until 25. Each was written in Lori's deliberate hand, the kind that never crossed out a line once it began. Inside them were fragments of stories, recipes, advice, and bits of memory. Her grandmother's quilt pattern, Charles's cornbread recipe, a pressed maple leaf from the tree they'd planted when Ethan was born. The last envelope read, "When you turn 25, open the box." She tucked the letters into a drawer lined with lavender sachets, the faint floral scent mixed with the clean smell of ink, a perfume of order and purpose. Then she turned to the final stack of papers on her desk, distribution list, personal effects. One by one, she signed off on each line. Phyllis Carr, executor, personal correspondence and trust oversight. Helen Rivers, antique cookbook collection. Lexington Historical Society, Charles Hale's tool set, engraved plaque included. Josephine E. Hale, property and contents, full transfer upon trust release. At the bottom, she wrote in smaller script, "All items pre-assigned. No secondary claimants. Nothing left undecided." She slid the document into her binder and closed it. The sound, soft, certain, felt like a punctuation mark she'd been working toward for years. A knock came at the door mid-afternoon. Light. Familiar. Phyllis, wearing her wool coat and that knowing half-smile. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled faintly of sugar and cinnamon. "Cider donuts," Phyllis said, holding out the bag. "Best kind of closure." Lori smiled. If only paperwork came glazed. They ate on the porch, watching the wind ripple through the mums. The flowers swayed but didn't break. "You really did it all, didn't you?" Phyllis said softly. "Every form, every folder, even your funeral plans." No funeral notice will be printed, Lori said, sipping her coffee. People can find out when they do. No speeches, no family eulogies, just Charles's poem, read once, then silence. Phyllis nodded slowly, eyes on the yard. That's so you. For a moment, neither spoke. The sky had softened into muted gold, the air alive with the smell of damp leaves. Finally, Phyllis asked, "So what now?" Lori looked out across her fence, the sun dipping behind it, throwing long slats of shadow across the grass. "I live," she said simply. Phyllis smiled. "That's the best line you've written yet." After Phyllis left, Lori lingered on the porch until night crept in. The mums glowed faintly under the porch light, tiny suns against the dark. Somewhere beyond the fence, a door slammed. Maddie's, maybe. But the sound didn't reach her in the same way anymore. She turned off the light, walked back inside, and paused by the bench plaque one last time through the window's reflection. Seen, prepared, unbothered. A fitting summary, she thought, not of defiance, but of peace, earned the hard way. As she climbed into bed, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint rattle of the gate chain. Lori smiled in the dark, whispering into the quiet. Let them see what they won't tend. Outside, the mums swayed gently, brilliant, alive, and perfectly beyond their reach. The day Lori signed the final codicil, the air was still enough to hear every small sound. The creak of the porch swing chain, the rustle of paper beneath her pen, even the faint hum of the refrigerator from inside the guest house. Grant had emailed the document that morning with his usual precision. A short note, no pleasantries. Final codicil enclosed, confirms all previous conditions, no additional revisions permitted. Once filed, status, completed. She printed it, placed it flat on her desk, and read every word aloud, as if saying them made the ink set deeper into truth. At the bottom, she signed. Her name, a quiet anchor. Loretta M. Hale. Then, in slow, deliberate motion, she slid the paper into a folder marked Completed, its tab neatly aligned among the others in the file drawer. The sound of it settling was so faint it might have gone unnoticed, but Lori heard it. To her, it was a bell toll, a final one. For a long moment, she stayed there, fingertips resting on the closed drawer, listening to the house breathe around her. It wasn't triumph she felt, or vengeance. It was the deep, low hum of something restored. Later that afternoon, the school bus groaned to a stop at the end of the cul-de-sac. Lori was already on the porch swing, a plate of cookies balanced on her lap, their warmth softening the air between them. Josie's bright voice carried before she appeared, the sound of sneakers against gravel growing louder until she burst through the gate, her braid coming loose, her backpack half-zipped. "Grandma!" "Slow down, sugar," Lori said, smiling. "You'll trip on that strap." Josie dropped her backpack by the steps and climbed onto the swing beside her, small legs kicking gently against the wood. "Mommy's in a mood again," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone only children could manage. She said something about the house and grown-up stuff. Daddy told her to stop talking where I could hear. Lori broke a cookie in half and handed it over. "Then you don't have to listen to any of that," she said softly. "You just listen to the good sounds." Josie nibbled, nodding. "Like birds?" "Birds," Lori said. "And wind, and cookies crunching." They sat together in companionable quiet. The porch swing creaked in rhythm with the wind, and the curtains inside the guest house fluttered through the open window like they were waving to the two of them. The scent of mums and cinnamon hung in the late afternoon light. Josie leaned against her, head fitting perfectly under her arm. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Do you think Mommy will ever like the flowers you planted?" Lori smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "Some flowers only bloom for the people who water them." Josie considered that, her face scrunched in thought. "Then I'll water them when I'm big." That's my girl, Lori whispered. They rocked a little longer, neither needing to speak. From across the fence came the faint, muffled cadence of Maddie's voice, a rising complaint carried on the breeze, punctuated by Ethan's low reply. Lori couldn't make out the words, but the tone was familiar. Brittle, persistent, losing ground. Josie's small hand found hers. Do you hear them? Lori squeezed gently. No, she said. Not anymore. The wind shifted, catching the edge of the mums along the fence line. Their petals trembled, gold and red against the fading sky. The swing creaked once more, then fell into easy rhythm. Josie finished her cookie and rested her head again. It's nice here, she murmured, voice sleepy. It is, Lori agreed. It's ours. A moment later, the school bus rumbled down another street, the sound fading into distance. The neighborhood settled into its usual evening hush. Inside the guest house, a single lamp glowed through the window, light spilling across the table where the completed folder now sat. Closed. Final. Waiting for no one. Lori looked out at the fence, its cedar slats catching the last streaks of sunset. She thought of Charles, of all the years between building and reclaiming, and how some victories made no noise at all. She leaned back, the swing rocking gently, and spoke the final line not as confession, but as truth. A small, satisfied whisper meant for the wind and no one else. She rolled her eyes when I coughed, so I rolled the property into my name. The fence stood firm. The house stood hers. And in that quiet Kentucky twilight, nothing else needed saying.